Well, good morning. Welcome to another Q&A. We're here with Jamie this morning, who got to preach on one of probably the more well-known stories in Genesis 22 in the Bible. But Jamie, for those who maybe haven't heard Genesis 22 or didn't have a chance to hear your message, would you mind giving us a recap?
Yeah, Genesis 22 is the story of where Abraham is asked of God to go and sacrifice Isaac, and it's obviously a very suspenseful story, because here Abraham is being asked to go and sacrifice this child of promise, upon which all the promises that God has given to him hinge. And what makes it so remarkable is, as we see Abraham at a point of his life where he's eager, he's willing to go and sacrifice his son Isaac, even though he's not able to process it from a human standpoint. He knows that God is good and God is faithful, and obviously takes him up and is about to sacrifice him. God tells him to not harm the boy, and God provides a ram for the sacrifice to take place. But as we saw throughout the sermon, and then also in light of some of the New Testament passages that I shared, that this is a precursor to Christ, that Christ is the one who is ultimately sacrificed, that God did it willingly, and God did not remove his hand of wrath and fury from his son, but he was sacrificed in our place so that we may know him.
We made a point early on that sometimes we can take promises and make them an obstacle for the gospel. And maybe that's the promise that we think have health or a great job, or just fill in the blank. Help us know how or when we're making a promise an obstacle to the gospel.
As John Calvin said, the great reformer of the 16th century, said that our hearts are idol factories, that we can take anything, even the greatest things, and make idols out of them. And you think about something that was a great gift like Isaac to Abraham. The propensity of the human heart is even take something like that and make it an ultimate thing, to where it actually becomes an obstacle to God himself. While none of us have ever been or ever will be in the same shoes as Abraham with a child like Isaac per se, on which all these promises those hinge, God does give us a lot of promises. God gives us a lot of blessings. And a great litmus test for whether something becomes an obstacle to God or not is what Tim Keller says. If we look at something in our life, and if we were to lose X, life would lose its meaning. So anything that we would say that if we were to lose it, it were to be taken away, our life would no longer have meaning, then that means that it's become an idol. And it's not, and it's become an ultimate thing rather than God himself.
Yeah, and Abraham clearly being willing to sacrifice Isaac did not hold him as ultimate. That's a great point.
Yeah.
I love too the point you made about how even though Abraham was given such a difficult task, there was an eagerness, there was a steadfastness in taking the 3-day journey to get there. Help us. Or what advice would you have for someone who's desiring to be more eager to see how God meets their needs, their steadfastness in wanting to see God provide for them and his promises? How do we do that?
Yeah, I think on some level it's not something that happens overnight. Going back to my illustration of lifting weights. You walk in as a 13-year-old boy and you see somebody lifting 300 pounds who's 5 years older. Well, that's not gonna happen overnight. And we see people in the Bible, we see people in our own lives that demonstrate a lot of faith, but that's something that only comes from walking with the Lord over a long period of time, making use of his means of grace, seeing how God works in our own life, and it's something that happens over time. But what I would say is that one of the things that can strengthen us in our faith is, again, making use of the means of grace, but also looking at the biblical precedent for looking back on where God has been faithful to us. David did that before he was about to go into battle against Goliath. He looked back on God's faithfulness to him to give him strength in fighting against the bear. And then when he was working as a shepherd boy, Joshua, when they crossed the river Jordan, God commanded them to put a pile of stones so that they could go back and tell their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren about God's faithfulness to them. And Abraham was the same way. He'd been walking with the Lord for a number of years, and even though God was calling to him to what seemed to be an impossible task, he was able to look back and look at God's faithfulness to him and giving him victory over foreign armies. That he was able to take his wife's dead womb and produce a child through that. So here God is calling him to another hard and difficult thing, but it's with Abraham not knowing exactly how it's going to pan out. He knows that this is a God who is able to do wonderful, remarkable things, and he steps out of faith saying, I don't know how he's going to provide, but I know that he will.
Yeah. Well, that's a great word. Thank you for your faithfulness in preaching that. Like always, we would love to hear from you. If you have any questions about a sermon that you heard on a Sunday, or just any questions in general that you'd like for us to discuss, we would love to do it here. So thank you for supporting Cahaba Park, and thank you for listening this morning.